A Bridge Too Far told the story of a doomed mission, but for many of its cast, the real tragedy began after the cameras stopped. Addiction, inherited trauma, and broken families reshaped their lives in shocking ways. Stay with us as we uncover the hidden aftermath you were never told. Dirk Bogarde as Lieutenant General Browning. Lieutenant General Frederick "Boy" Browning, the strategist whose decisions echo through A Bridge Too Far, was played by Dirk Bogarde. At 56 years old, he brought cold intellect and moral tension to the film, shaping its most unsettling perspective. His portrayal refused comfort, forcing the audience to confront accountability. Born on March 28, 1921, in London, Bogarde's childhood unfolded under the shadow of instability and war. Evacuations, bombings, and fractured schooling replaced any sense of safety. These disruptions hardened him early, preparing him for a future defined by endurance rather than ease. Innocence ended long before adulthood began. Romantic life unfolded in silence. Bogarde never married, living for over 4 decades with his partner Anthony Forwood in a society that demanded secrecy. The need to conceal love created lasting psychological strain, forcing distance between public image and private truth. Loss arrived when Forwood died slowly from illness, leaving Bogarde emotionally exposed and isolated. The body eventually followed the mind into collapse. Years of heavy smoking weakened his heart, and in 1996, a massive stroke left him partially paralyzed and struggling to speak. Writing became his final refuge as movement failed. Dirk Bogarde died on May 8, 1999, at 78 years old, from a heart attack at his home in London. His ashes were scattered at Le Pigeonnier in Grasse, France, the place tied to his longest companionship. With an estimated net worth of $10 million, his true wealth lay in courage, the strength to survive war, repression, and bodily collapse without surrendering dignity. Sean Connery as Major General Urquhart. Major General Roy Urquhart, the besieged British commander in A Bridge Too Far, was portrayed by Sean Connery. At 47 years old, he carried the film's emotional gravity, embodying a leader cut off from command, watching plans unravel while lives slipped away. The character became the moral spine of the story. Born on August 25, 1930, in Fountainbridge, Edinburgh, Connery grew up in severe poverty. His father drove lorries, his mother cleaned houses, and the family crowded into slum housing where warmth and privacy were rare. He left school at 13 to work, polishing coffins and delivering milk at dawn, learning discipline through exhaustion. Those early years carved a toughness that never softened. As adulthood arrived, personal life proved no gentler. Connery's marriage to actress Diane Cilento fractured under infidelity, jealousy, and public accusations of domestic violence, leaving emotional wreckage behind him and his son Jason. A later marriage to Micheline Roquebrune brought stability, but the damage of earlier years lingered quietly. Love, for Connery, was never simple or untouched by power and pressure. Physical decline followed success. Discharged from the Royal Navy as a teenager with chronic stomach ulcers, Connery carried illness throughout his life, later surviving throat cancer in 2003. In his final years, dementia gradually erased memory and independence, a cruel reversal for a man defined by control. Silence replaced authority, and withdrawal replaced command. Sean Connery died in his sleep on October 31, 2020, at 90 years old, at his home in the Bahamas. The cause was pneumonia and respiratory failure, recorded in the early hours of the morning. He was cremated, and his ashes were later scattered in Scotland, closing the circle of a hard life begun in slums. With an estimated net worth of $350 million, his legacy rests not in fortune, but in endurance forged through pain. Laurence Olivier as Dr. Sponder. Dr. Sponder, the exhausted Dutch physician clinging to humanity inside A Bridge Too Far, was portrayed by Laurence Olivier. At 70 years old, He gave the film one of its quietest yet most devastating performances, turning brief screen time into moral gravity. His character lingered long after he left the screen. Born on May 22, 1907, in Dorking, England, Olivier's childhood was marked by loss and fear. His mother died when he was just 12, leaving an emotional void that never closed. Raised by a strict clergyman father, he grew up under relentless discipline rather than comfort. At school, he was bullied, isolated, and learned early that vulnerability invited pain. That hunger for approval followed him into adulthood and marriage. Olivier married 3 times, each union reflecting a different chapter of his emotional life. His marriage to Vivian Lee burned brightest and collapsed most violently, undone by her severe mental illness and the unbearable strain of 2 towering egos colliding. The breakdown left both scarred, their private suffering magnified by public fascination. Stability arrived only later with Joan Plowright, though the cost of earlier years never fully disappeared. As age advanced, the body began to fail him. Olivier battled dermatomyositis, a degenerative muscle disease that steadily drained his strength, alongside prostate cancer in his later years. When he did appear, the fragility in his voice carried a truth no technique could fake. Laurence Olivier died on July 11, 1989, at 82 years old, at his home in Steyning, West Sussex, from renal failure, in the quiet aftermath of prolonged illness. He was cremated, and his ashes were placed in Poets' Corner at Westminster Abbey. With an estimated net worth of $20 million, his true legacy was not wealth, but the transformation of private pain into timeless art. Gene Hackman as Major General Sosabowski. Major General Stanisław Sosabowski, the defiant Polish commander in A Bridge Too Far, was portrayed by Gene Hackman. At 47 years old, he brought moral friction to the film, embodying a soldier who saw disaster coming and was ignored. His Sosabowski injected anger, pride, and tragic foresight into the story. Born on January 30, 1930 in San Bernardino, California, Hackman's childhood was shaped by abandonment and instability. His father walked out on the family when Gene was still young, leaving a lasting sense of rejection that hardened him early. Moving constantly, never rooted, he learned to rely only on himself. At 16, he lied about his age to join the U.S. Marine Corps, choosing discipline over chaos and trading adolescence for survival. Marriage brought no escape from strain. Hackman married Faye Maltese in 1956, and the union lasted nearly 30 years, strained by long absences, rising fame, and emotional distance before ending in divorce in 1986. A later marriage to Betsy Arakawa offered calm and privacy, but it also led to near-total withdrawal from public life. The body eventually forced what the mind resisted. Hackman lived for decades with heart disease, undergoing angioplasty in 1990, and later suffered a slow cognitive decline. In his final years, advanced Alzheimer's disease eroded memory and judgment, leaving him dependent and isolated. The once commanding presence who defined films like The French Connection and Unforgiven faded into silence. Gene Hackman died around February 18, 2025, at 95 years old, in his Santa Fe home. The cause was severe heart disease, complicated by advanced Alzheimer's and kidney failure, with death occurring days after his wife had already passed away. He left behind an estimated net worth of $80 million, a fortune earned through discipline and defiance, yet his final chapter was marked not by accolades, but by quiet disappearance. Ryan O'Neal as Brigadier General, Gavin Brigadier General James Gavin, the airborne commander caught between courage and consequence in A Bridge Too Far, was played by Ryan O'Neal. At 36 years old, he brought youthful intensity to a hardened military figure, standing amid chaos with resolve that masked inner conflict. The role marked a sharp contrast to the romantic image audiences expected from him. Born on April 20, 1941 in Los Angeles, O'Neal grew up in constant motion and tension. His family relocated frequently, and instability became routine. Violence and intimidation shaped his adolescence, pushing him toward boxing as a form of protection rather than sport. Childhood offered little safety, only preparation for confrontation. Adult relationships repeated that turbulence. O'Neill's marriages to Joanna Moore and Lee Taylor Young ended in divorce, leaving fractured families behind. His long, volatile relationship with Farrah Fawcett oscillated between devotion and destruction, defined by infidelity, jealousy, and emotional chaos. The damage spilled into his relationship with his children, several of whom later spoke openly about abuse, addiction, and estrangement. Physical illness eventually closed in. O'Neill was diagnosed with chronic myelogenous leukemia, followed years later by prostate cancer, illnesses that drained his strength while addiction continued to erode stability. Even as his career had once soared with Love Story, earning an Academy Award nomination, and Paper Moon, his later years were consumed by hospitals, courtrooms, and loss. Ryan O'Neil died on December 8, 2023, at 82 years old, at St. John's Health Center in Santa Monica from congestive heart failure with cardiomyopathy as a contributing factor. He was buried beside Farrah Fawcett at Pierce Brothers Westwood Village Memorial Park. With an estimated net worth of $30 million, his story ended not as a Hollywood fairy tale, but as a cautionary portrait of fame that could not outrun pain. Michael Caine as Lieutenant Colonel J.O.E. Vandeleur. Lieutenant Colonel J.O.E. Vandeleur, the composed cavalry officer in A Bridge Too Far, was played by Michael Caine. At 44 years old, he embodied calm authority amid chaos, lending the film a sense of professionalism shaped by experience rather than bravado. The character moved the story forward through quiet competence. Born on March 14, 1933 in South London, Caine grew up in extreme poverty during wartime Britain. Bombings, evacuation, and overcrowded housing defined his early years, while hunger and fear were constant companions. Raised in slums, he learned resilience long before confidence. The war left him with memories that would later resurface in uniform once again. Personal life carried its own evolution. Caine's first marriage to Patricia Haynes ended quickly, marked by immaturity and financial strain. His second marriage to Shakira Baksh, beginning in 1973, became the anchor of his life, offering stability and emotional grounding that lasted decades. The contrast between the two relationships reflected a man who learned slowly but deeply from loss. Physical decline arrived late but unmistakably. After serving in the Korean War, Caine carried the psychological weight of combat throughout his life. In later years, spinal problems, falls, and reduced mobility forced him into gradual retirement. When he finally stepped away, his career already stood defined by triumphs, such as the Italian Job and 2 Academy Awards. As of 2026, Michael Caine is 93 years old. He lives quietly, retired from acting, dividing his time between London and private residences, reflecting on a career that spanned 8 decades. With an estimated net worth of $80 million, he stands as a survivor of war, poverty, and time itself, one of the last living bridges between classic cinema and the modern age. Edward Fox as Lieutenant General Horrocks, Lieutenant General Brian Horrocks, the composed British commander in A Bridge Too Far, was played by Edward Fox. At 40 years old, he brought measured authority and understated intelligence to the role, embodying command through precision rather than force. His Horrocks balanced warmth and discipline with quiet confidence. Born on April 13, 1937 in Chelsea, London, Fox grew up surrounded by theatrical legacy. His family was steeped in performance, and comparison became unavoidable from an early age. Rather than comfort, fame within the household created pressure to measure up. Identity had to be earned, not inherited. Relationships unfolded cautiously. Fox's first marriage to Tracy Reed ended early, leaving emotional distance behind. Years later, he found stability with Joanna David, whom he married in 2004 after a long partnership. Family life eventually became a place of continuity, shared with children who also entered the acting world. Thanks to the happy marriage, Fox's story centers on endurance through work. His career produced sharply etched performances in The Day of the Jackal and Gandhi, alongside stage work that sustained his craft beyond film. Consistency, not excess, defined his professional rhythm. As of 2026, Edward Fox is 89 years old. He lives quietly between London and Dorset, largely withdrawn from acting while remaining a respected presence in British theatre history. With an estimated net worth of $10 million, his legacy rests on precision, restraint, and a lifetime spent carrying command without noise. Anthony Hopkins as Lieutenant Colonel Frost. Lieutenant Colonel John Frost, the resolute officer holding the bridge in A Bridge Too Far, was portrayed by Anthony Hopkins. At 40 years old, he embodied calm leadership as isolation closed in. His Frost was defined by restraint, clarity, and acceptance of impossible odds. The role anchored the film's emotional tension without spectacle. Born on December 31, 1937 in Port Talbot, Wales, Hopkins grew up painfully alone. He struggled at school, was frequently bullied, and developed a deep sense of inadequacy that followed him into adulthood. Music, painting, and imagination became his refuge when human connection failed. That loneliness hardened into self-doubt long before success ever arrived. Marriage mirrored inner conflict. Hopkins married Petronella Barker, then Jennifer Linton, both unions strained by emotional distance and addiction, before ending in divorce. Stability only arrived later with Stella Aroyave, whose presence coincided with a quieter, more grounded phase of life. Hopkins has openly admitted failure as a husband and father, accepting the cost of obsession and self-absorption. Alcohol nearly destroyed him. By his early 30s, Hopkins was a severe alcoholic, drinking daily and spiraling toward collapse. In 1975, just 2 years before A Bridge Too Far, he stopped drinking entirely after asking for help, a decision he later described as life-saving. Sobriety became the foundation that allowed performances like The Silence of the Lambs, earning him an Academy Award, and The Remains of the Day to emerge with devastating control. As of 2026, Anthony Hopkins is 89 years old. He lives between the United States and the UK, still creatively active through acting, painting, and writing, having published his memoir We Did Okay, Kid in 2025. With an estimated net worth of $160 million, his legacy is not only brilliance, but survival of loneliness, addiction, and time itself. James Caan as Staff Sergeant Dohun. Staff Sergeant Dohun, the hardened American paratrooper in A Bridge Too Far, was portrayed by James Caan. At 37 years old, he injected raw physicality and nervous intensity into the film, embodying a soldier driven by instinct rather than strategy. His presence added sweat, fear, and volatility to the battlefield. The role reflected a man always one step from explosion. Born on March 26, 1940 in New York City, Caan grew up in a Jewish immigrant household shaped by survival. His father was a butcher who worked relentlessly, while the streets of Queens taught Caan toughness early. Violence was common, and fighting became second nature, a way to prove existence rather than dominance. Home offered discipline, but little emotional shelter. That volatility followed him into adulthood and marriage. Caan married 4 times, each relationship fractured by addiction, infidelity, and emotional absence. Cocaine abuse escalated through the 1970s and 1980s, corroding trust and stability, even as he became a father multiple times. Love never lasted long enough to heal the damage already done. Mental health struggles intensified the collapse. Caan battled depression and severe drug addiction, reaching a point where his career stalled and his body began to fail. Though he delivered unforgettable performances in The Godfather, earning an Academy Award nomination, and later in Misery, success could not silence the chaos inside. Periods of withdrawal from Hollywood mirrored his internal unraveling. James Caan died on July 6, 2022, at 82 years old, at Ronald Reagan UCLA Medical Center in Los Angeles. The cause was a heart attack brought on by coronary artery disease, compounded by COPD and congestive heart failure. He was buried at Eden Memorial Park Cemetery. With an estimated net worth of $20 million, his life closed as it was lived, loud, bruised, and unforgettable. Wolfgang Preiss as Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, the aging strategist at the top of Germany's collapsing command in A Bridge Too Far, was portrayed by Wolfgang Preiss. At 67 years old, he embodied exhaustion rather than authority, giving the film a face of inevitability and decline. His Rundstedt was not shouting orders, but absorbing failure. The role framed defeat as something already written. Born on February 27, 1910, in Nuremberg, Germany, Preiss grew up in an intellectual household as the son of a schoolteacher. He immersed himself in philosophy, German literature, and drama, drawn more to ideas than comfort. His youth unfolded amid political radicalization and instability, shaping a disciplined but inward-looking temperament. Thought came before emotion, distance before warmth. Marriage offered structure rather than escape. Preiss married 3 times, with his final marriage to Ruth Schulmeister lasting from 1955 until her death in 2002. Family life remained largely private, steady but subdued, mirroring his reserved personality. Stability existed, but intimacy was carefully guarded. There are no records of prolonged illness dominating his life, and instead, his body held until old age. His career filled the space where vulnerability might have surfaced, especially through roles as German officers in films like The Longest Day. Acting became a controlled channel for darkness rather than a confession of it. Wolfgang Preiss died on November 27, 2002, at 92 years old, in Buhl, Baden-Württemberg, after complications from a fall. He was laid to rest quietly, without spectacle. With an estimated net worth of $5 million, his legacy remains unsettling. A lifetime portraying authority drained of mercy, shaped by history, he never fully escaped. Hardy Krüger as General Ludwig. General Ludwig, the rigid German officer in A Bridge Too Far, was portrayed by Hardy Krüger. At 49 years old, he carried into the film a chilling authenticity born not of performance, but memory. His portrayal was restrained, disciplined, and unsettlingly real. The role echoed a past he never escaped. Born on April 12, 1928 in Berlin, Krüger's childhood unfolded under the brutality of Nazi Germany. Raised by fanatical Nazi parents, he was indoctrinated early and forced into the Hitler Youth, where obedience replaced morality. At 18, he was ordered to shoot American soldiers and refused, an act that earned him a death sentence later overturned. That moment severed his loyalty to the regime forever. Marriage became a search for stability after chaos. Krüger married 3 times, fathering several children across different unions. While love offered temporary refuge, the scars of war and displacement lingered beneath family life. Domestic calm never fully erased what he had seen or done as a boy soldier. Psychological trauma defined his inner world. Though never formally diagnosed publicly, Krüger carried deep war-related trauma, shaped by indoctrination, near execution, and combat as a teenager. Acting became a way to confront history, even as he rejected the glorification of war. Films like The Flight of the Phoenix and Barry Lyndon reflected a man haunted by survival rather than victory. Hardy Krüger died on January 19, 2022, at 93 years old, at his home in Palm Springs, California. No violent end followed him this time, only quiet release after a long reckoning with history. He left behind an estimated net worth of $10 million, but his true legacy was moral defiance, a child of Nazism who chose conscience over command. Jeremy Kemp as RAF Briefing Officer. The RAF Briefing Officer, the composed voice of procedure in A Bridge Too Far, was played by Jeremy Kemp. At 42 years old, he delivered calm clarity amid strategic confusion, grounding the film's early tension. His role was brief but precise, reflecting the machinery behind the battle. Order spoke before chaos erupted. Born on February 3, 1935, in Chesterfield, Derbyshire, Kemp was raised in a disciplined, upper-middle-class environment. Educated at Abbott's Home School, he learned restraint early, encouraged to observe rather than dominate. Childhood shaped him into a quiet presence, attentive and controlled, never seeking the spotlight. Acting became a measured choice, not rebellion. Personal life remained intentionally limited. Kemp never married, believing commitment brought confinement rather than comfort. His long-term partnership ended before him, leaving his later years increasingly solitary. Emotional independence defined his private world, even as connection quietly faded. In later life, health declined gradually. Kemp endured a long illness that slowly reduced his energy and presence, though details remained private. Career highlights like The Blue Max and the miniseries The Winds of War stood as markers of consistency rather than stardom. His work faded gently, without scandal or reinvention. Jeremy Kemp died on July 19, 2019, at 84 years old after prolonged illness. He passed quietly, far from public attention. With an estimated net worth of $5 million, his life closed as it was lived, restrained, dignified, and almost deliberately understated. Frank Grimes as Major Fuller. Major Fuller, the young officer navigating urgency and obedience in A Bridge Too Far, was played by Frank Grimes. At 30 years old, he brought nervous energy and moral tension to the role, capturing a generation pressed into command too early. His performance reflected haste, pressure, and consequence. The character stood at the crossroads between orders and doubt. Born on March 9, 1947, in Dublin, Ireland, Grimes grew up as the youngest of 7 children. Resources were thin, attention divided, and ambition had to be fought for rather than assumed. A teacher's love of Shakespeare ignited his passion for the stage, offering escape from limitation. Theater became both refuge and purpose. Adult life unfolded through complicated bonds. Grimes married Michelle Lohan, with whom he had 2 children, before the marriage ended in divorce. Later, he found steadier ground with Jeanette Clark, building a family that endured until his death. Relationships matured alongside him, shaped by work that demanded constant movement and reinvention. There were no long-publicized illnesses through most of his life, and instead his career carried the weight. Stage triumphs like Borstal Boy earned him a Tony Award nomination, while screen work in Coronation Street and Royal Flash sustained him for decades. Only near the end did health quietly fail, pulling him away from work he never abandoned willingly. Frank Grimes died on August 1, 2025, at 78 years old, in Ireland, following a short illness. He was survived by his wife and children, leaving behind a life rooted in theater rather than fame. With an estimated net worth of $1 million, his true inheritance was devotion to craft, steady, unglamorous, and deeply human. Paul Maxwell as Major General Maxwell Taylor. Major General Maxwell Taylor, the measured American commander shaping strategy from afar in A Bridge Too Far, was portrayed by Paul Maxwell. At 56 years old, he projected calm authority and institutional weight, embodying command through restraint rather than theatrics. His tailor represented planning rooms far from gunfire, where decisions carried invisible consequences. The role gave the film its quiet sense of American command. Born on November 12, 1921 in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Maxwell grew up during an era defined by uncertainty and war. Raised with discipline and education at the center of life, he later served in the Royal Canadian Artillery during World War II, learning hierarchy and consequence firsthand. Those early experiences shaped a controlled demeanor that never sought attention. Authority, to him, was learned before it was performed. Marriage offered steadiness after upheaval. Maxwell married Mary Lindsay following the war, and together they raised a daughter. Family life remained largely private, a constant amid years of relocation and work. Stability mattered more than exposure, and domestic quiet counterbalanced a public career built on secondary roles. Health became the defining struggle of his final years. Maxwell was diagnosed with cancer, a battle that slowly curtailed his work and strength. Though his career included notable appearances such as Coronation Street and voice roles in science fiction classics, illness narrowed his world to endurance rather than ambition. Acting receded as survival took precedence. Paul Maxwell died on December 19, 1991, at 70 years old, in London, England, after a prolonged fight with cancer. He was laid to rest quietly, without ceremony or spectacle. With an estimated net worth of $2 million, his legacy rests in reliability, a life spent supporting stories larger than himself. 49 years later, A Bridge Too Far is no longer just a war epic. It's a mirror of the fragile, turbulent lives behind the uniforms. Which story shocked you the most, and whose fate still lingers in your mind? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you want more deep dives into the hidden lives behind classic films, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for the next story.